Hello there and welcome. My name is Michael Fudge and this is Lesson 12 in Learning to Program in Java. In this lesson and in Lesson 13 we will cover arrays. Lesson 12 will introduce the array concept. We'll show you how to make arrays of variables and also arrays of objects. And then in Lesson 13 we'll look at multi-dimensional arrays. On the agenda for Lesson 12 we'll first introduce the concept of an array and why you want to use it. Then we'll discuss how you can index the array and enumerate the array. And then we'll have a couple of demos. First, let's start out with what is an array. An array is nothing more than a container holding a fixed number of values of the same type. So it's just like a variable, only think of it as multiple variables, all contiguous, and they hold the same type of data. Arrays are indexed by element. So if you make an array of size 10, there's 10 elements in the array, and the array starts at 0 and ends at whatever the size of the array is. So if I create an array of size 10, that array would start at 0 and end at 9. So 0 and 9 inclusive makes 10 full elements in the array. We call accessing any one element in the array indexing the array. So here's an example of me declaring an array of strings in Java. As you'll notice, there's brackets after the data type, and those brackets tell Java that I'm not talking about one string, but I'm talking about an array of string, that is a contiguous block of strings. How many I want, that's specified in the new statement. It says new string 5, that means 5 contiguous strings. And those strings have 5 elements, and they start at 0 and end at 4. So to index any one of these arrays, I use the value of the index inside the brackets of the variable. For example, names sub 0 gets assigned the value Tom. That puts the string Tom in the first element of the array, that is index 0. Same thing for Bob, that would go in index 1, Joe in 2, etc., etc. And perhaps at this point you can see one of the great advantages of an array is that you can enumerate through the array with a for loop. I can easily create a for loop that goes all the way to 4 each time, either printing or accessing or doing something with the values in the array. The important thing to remember about an array is, like a variable, it consumes memory. So if you have, an array of strings and there's 500, there's going to be 500 strings in memory. Okay, let's start out with a really simple example, and I'm going to jump right into the code so that you can kind of see the concept I'm trying to show you through an array. All right, here we are in the NetBeans IDE, and I have my Array Basics Java program that I started, and you can see I don't really have much here, but I did create a comment, and that comment has kind of the concept that I'm going to try to show you today. What I've done is, imagine we have a class, and our class has students in it, and I have 4 students in my class: Tom, Ed, Joe, and Bob. And each of those students has a corresponding grade, like Tom's grade is 77, and Ed's grade is 84, and Joe's grade is 80, etc. I can implement this type of structure using 2 arrays, and then I use the index in the array to correspond to the record of the student. For example, grades sub 2 should be an 80, and students sub 2 should be Joe. So when I retrieve the index 2, I get Joe as the person and then Joe's grade as an 80. We call this a parallel array. It's a concept that we use to represent complex constructs of data. Now, the better way to implement this would be with an array of classes, and we'll do that in the next example. But for now, we'll start with a parallel array. So let me just show you some of the things that you can do in an array. First, let me just declare my grades array. I need an array of size 4 to hold my 4 grades, 0 through 3. Then I can assign values as such. First grade is 77. The next grade is an 84. The next grade after that is an 80. And the final grade should be a 96. Likewise, I'm going to make a string array to hold my student names. This time I'm going to declare it a little differently. Rather than just do this, I'm going to assign values and initialize my array at the same time. Check it out. So the statement on line 23 really combines everything I did above in lines 21 through 16 here. What I'm doing here is I'm declaring an array, I'm naming it students, and I'm setting that to be a new string array of size 4 because there's 4 values. So student sub 0 is Tom, student 1 is Ed, student 2 is Joe, and student 3 is Bob, just like we see up here. Shorthand notation for that. Very convenient, by the way. I could have written the top example the same way, but I just wanted to show you another way that you can create an array. All right, I'm going to do a little bit of copy-paste magic because you certainly don't want to have to watch me type this in, but the next thing I want to do is maybe print out a table of students and their grades. So I'm going to print out my table header first. This is simply going to print out the number and then the name of the student and then their grade, and I have tabs in between. And now I think I'll use a for loop to enumerate my array. So this is the real power of the array, is that because it's the same variable name but it has a different index for each value, you can use a loop to enumerate the array quite easily. For example, the exit condition in the loop control variable of an array is always the maximum size of the array. So you always want to say I less than and then whatever the maximum size of the array is, and start the array index at 0 like I did here. So my array is size 4. One thing I can do is if I don't want to hard code in 4, this isn't going to work if I change my array to size 5 later on, then I have to go back and remember to do it here, is I can just use the length property of the array. So I could say grades.length, and that will say however long, however number of elements there are in the array. It sure beats the alternative, which is if I hard code in a 4 here and then change this code later on to make 5 grades or 6 grades, I have to remember to go down here to my for loop and change it there. So a better strategy is to use the array itself, and then there's a property called length. And since they're parallel arrays, they should be of the same size. I could use either students or grades, but I just chose to use grades. So now I'm going to write a really sophisticated printf here. Let's see if I can get it right on the first try. I want to print the number of the array, then a tab, then the person's name, then another tab, then their grade, then a new line. So that would be, I need to print I, the index, then students sub I, that ith student in the array, like Tom, for 0. Then I would like to print out Tom's grade, which would be grades I. And I believe that should do it. Let's run the program and see what happens. So there you go. 0, Tom, 77, 1, Ed, 84, etc., etc., all the way up to 4 students and grades. Really quick, what does it look like when you debug this code and inspect the array variables? What do they look like? And let me step into the code, and I'm going to just jump down to this point here in line 28. I'm just pushing F8 till I get down there. And now you see it says students, and the data type is string array. And it shows you that the length is 4. So if I open this up, you'll see each of the 3 indexes in the array. Students sub 0, sub 1, sub 2, sub 3, and you'll see their values, Tom, Ed, Joe, Bob. Likewise, if you were to inspect the grades array, you would see that there are 4 values as well, 0 through 3, and then the grade values as well. So it's kind of interesting. The variable has one name, but there's more than one value, and those values are accessed by index. And this is, again, extremely useful when you want to enumerate over a set of variables. It would be very difficult to do this if I had variables called Tom's grade and Steve's grade and Ed's grade and Joe's grade. That would be very difficult for me to do some kind of loop where I could calculate the average grade or anything like that. And I think I'll leave that as my last exercise here. I will stop debugging, and now I will calculate the average grade, and I will show you how you could do this easily with the array. Let's first create our variable, and we'll set it to 0 to start. And what I'd like to do here is inside the for loop, I would like to say average is whatever average is plus grades I. And really that's not average, that's sum. So I guess I should be accurate and say sum. And then down here I could say double average equals sum divided by grades dot length. I don't want to say 4, I want to say grades length. That way I am writing code that will be easy. We could change it much easier this way. And then system out print class average. Okay, let's give it a run. Class average 84 1/4. Let's see what's going on. I think I'll put a breakpoint here. And then I'm going to debug it. And it's going to stop right there on line 31. I'll look at my variables. So grades, there they are. I is currently 0. And sum is 0.0. So I'm going to hit F8. Now sum is 77.0 because grade 0 was 77. Next is going to add an 84 on the next loop. Here we go. Ready? F8. I'm up here. F8. I'm on line 31. Now it's going to add 77 plus grades 1, and grades 1 is a 90. Grades 1 is an 84. I'm sorry, not a 90. It's an 84. So then it's going to do it again. And now it's going to add 161 plus grades 2, which is 80. And now the value is 241. And then finally it's going to take grades 3, which is a 96, and add that to 241, yielding 337.0. Then it's going to divide that by 4 and print it out, 84 1/4. I hope you found that initial demo useful. Now we're going to kick it up a notch and do the same thing, but instead of doing a parallel array, we're going to do arrays of objects. This is a more common approach to solving the problem that you just saw. What we'll do is we'll make a student class, and then we'll declare an array of student. All right, I'm back in my NetBeans IDE, and I have my project array of objects. And inside of array of objects, I have two classes. I have student Java and array of objects Java. Student Java is a very simple class. It has two private members, name and grade. So I'm going to have a name like Tom and then a grade 84. And then I have two get methods. One just returns the name and one just returns the grade. And in order to set the student name and grade, I'm using the constructor. So here's my student constructor. It takes two arguments, a name and a grade. The name parameter gets assigned to the private variable name, and then the grade parameter gets assigned to the private variable grade. So the only way to set a student's name or grade is to create an object from the student class. I know that's not a very efficient or useful class, but it's what we have just for the demo, and it should work fine. Let's think about this a little more. Rather than me saying something like int array x gets assigned new int of size 4, now I'm going to make an array of students. Student x is new student, let's say of size 20. It's going to make maybe 20 students in the class. And then I can go through and assign values to each of the elements in the array. For example, I can say x0 is new student. The name is going to be Bob, and the grade is going to be a 92. And so on and so forth. You can see that this might take a while to fill up, but I could do that. I could actually make some kind of a while loop that asks you to enter those values, and I guess I will do that in a second. But I also want to quickly show you how you could use the explicit definition of the array. So let's suppose I say student, and I'll just call this students, and then new student of size 4. Rather than declare them this way, I'm just going to define all my objects in line. Let's do the first one. New student Tom. His grade's a 77. That's the first one. New student Ed. He's an 84. New student Joe. He gets an 80. New student Bob. He gets a 96. Notice how I cannot put a value up here in the array declaration and then assign these in line. I can't do that. I have to leave it off. If I leave it off like that, it knows how big it is because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. And then I'm not going to bore you with the code, but I have this same code from before to print out these students. There we go. And let's execute it. Same results. One other thing that I'll add here is that I certainly can debug this, and what you'll see is a little more interesting than what you saw before because I only have one array. So let me put my breakpoint right here, and let's run the program with debugging. And I'm going to stop on line 16. There we go. Now if I check the variables out, I have a student array. See that? And there are 4 values in the student array. Now if I open up one of these values, there are 2 private members. Tom is the name and 77 is the grade. And if I look at this one, I see that Joe is the name and 80 is the grade. And then how do you access name and grade? Through the public method. So see, I'm saying students sub I dot name. The name method returns the private member name, just like we did in other object and class examples. As a final trick here, let's write this so that it asks us for student names and grades, and then inputs them, creates an object of type student, and then adds that to the array, rather than hard coding in all these students, which is kind of unrealistic. Okay, first thing I need to do is I took out the code that explicitly defined each of the objects in the students array, and I just went back to being a student of size 4, student array of size 4. Next thing I need to do is I need to include my scanner for input. Okay, I'm going to need variables for string and int for grade and name. And now I can prompt for input. How does this sound? Oh, well, I need my for loop, right? I need to say for, and then my loop control variable needs to start at 0 because the first index in my array is a 0. The first element in my array is indexed at 0, I should say. And then my loop control variable always should be less than the size of the array. So I less than students length. And by using students.length, I could always change the length up here, and then the program still works. I don't have to rewrite any of the other code. Then increment that loop control variable. And then inside the body of the loop, I need to prompt to enter the name and the grade and the name, then accept those inputs, and then create a new student object and assign it into its appropriate element in the array. So enter student grade then name for student number %d. And let's get the inputs. Then, this is the critical step. I need to make a new object of type student and put that into students I. I'm going to call my constructor with name and grade. Can actually shorten this to calling these methods right inside the constructor, but I prefer to do it this way for readability. Okay, that should do it. Let's run it and see if it works. Grade then name for student 0, 77 Tom. 84 Ed. 80 Joe. And 96 Bob. There you go. Tom, Ed, Joe, Bob. Cool. So just for grins, let's debug it. We're going to put a breakpoint right here so that we can watch how this loop is filling up the students array. So here's my students array. Right now there's no values. They're all nulls. See that? So let's watch what happens as we go through the loop. F8. It's waiting for input. Okay, now I have name is Tom, grade is 77, And watch what happens here when we new up a new student object using our constructor. See that? Now I have student is the type, and I have 77 Tom. And as I go through this again and again, you'll see that it fills up each element of the array. I'm going to just run it from this point forward, putting in the rest of my input. Okay, now I'm down here on line 21. If I look at my variables, you'll see that all of my students have been defined. There's my original one, and there's the last one that I put in. And then you see it matches up with what I've been typing here. And last but not least, this for loop will now go through that array and then print it back out. So unlike other programs where we've just kind of looped over inputs and outputs, we're actually storing all of the data in memory, and then we're going back over it with the array. And we can index it as many times as we want, or manipulate it as many times as we want, because all the variables are stored in memory. Tom, Bill, Mike, Steve, you saw each of them print out down there. Well, I hope these examples help you better understand the array construct in Java programming. Stay tuned for lesson 13 when we get into multi-dimensional arrays, and of course we'll have a great use case for that. Thank you very much for watching, and I welcome your questions, comments, and feedback on YouTube. We'll see you real soon.